Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. reporting. Well, I want to call your attention to my new book. It's called Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America with Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion. We could have gone on with racism and many, many other elements. Freemasonry would be another one, but we had to limit it to that. So you can get this at progressivepress.com. I urge you to buy a copy right away, progressivepress.com. You can get a paper copy, which will be shipped now within a matter of days. And a matter of days means starting from today. It's Friday, the 12th of October. You get a paper copy in days. I think you can get an ebook right away. Now, the ebook price is low. It's $6. That price is probably going to go up. So if you don't want to have to pay more for the ebook, because it's in demand, you see, the price goes up. Buy it now. Get it now, and get it also for your relatives, right? Get it for Christmas. Get it for Thanksgiving. Romney could now very well win the election. So the Kolob candidate, you've got to know about the Kolob candidate, right? Don't come whining, oh, I never knew Romney was a member of this Freemasonic cult. Well, he is, and we can go through this in quite a bit of detail. So it's tarpley.net for the news. You can get to it through tarpley.net. You want to go through tarpley.net, just click on the cover of the book, which shows the mug of the Kolob candidate and the temple there in Salt Lake City. Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America, Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion. That's the big issue. Now, the other thing, of course, we're getting ready for the 27th of October. We've now got about 2 weeks before that key meeting. 2 weeks from tomorrow in New York City, we're going to have the launch of the United Front Against Austerity. We've just had another statement on the world economy from the austerity ghouls at the International Monetary Fund. They say that the world depression is getting worse. No forecast from the IMF is ever issued without political motivation. And, of course, they're talking about the fiscal cliff and the grand bargain of genocidal austerity that they want to impose on the American people. If you want to fight back against all of that, you better come on October 27th. People who saw Biden last night will notice his heart-rending empathy for the lunch bucket set, the blue collar, the working class, Scranton, Pennsylvania, and all this. And I'm afraid this is a tissue of lies. What we have on that debate stage, of course, is the open genocidalist, the lunatic, raving reactionary Ryan, and then on the other side, the subtle, deceptive left cover. He's got some left cover, populist cover, whatever you want to call it, Biden. But this ultimately converges on similar results, although not identical. And with Romney, of course, more open in the sense of, making genocidal austerity into a positive good rather than practicing it under a cloak. So if you want to fight back against that, if you don't want to be sucked in to the logic of these two bankrupt choices, if you want to register yourself as trying to create an organized, programmatic, fighting, class-based alternative to the bankruptcy of Obama-Romney, then the only place to be is New York City on October 27th. And let me stress, we want to thank INN Network, right? INN Network News, INN World Report, Lenny Charles there, 56 Walker Street. He is the person who has this auditorium. So we want to thank INN World Report. And actually one of the things that might come out of this is an attempt to get INN back on the air. So it's INN Network News. At one time, it was a daily television program competing with the pabulum you get from Amy Goodman and the Ford Foundation over there. But that's where it's going to be. So 56 Walker Street, Tribeca is the area, Canal Street, Lower Manhattan, from noon to 6 on the 27th of October. Now, we have to look at a number of things, and I guess we ought to go first to the campaign-related, which happens to be Benghazi. A striking series of revelations now in the hearings that were held in the House Government Operations, I guess it was, House Government Operations. They called it now Oversight and Government Reform Committee. All right, that's what the Republicans call it since they've been in. But it's used to be Adolphus Towns, and it's now Darrell Issa. So they're trying to put out scandals against Obama with Fast and Furious and all this. So they had these hearings, and out of this, here's the finding. The Romney campaign is implicated heavily in both prongs of the September 11th quasi-October surprise. The Romney campaign is implicated in both prongs of the October surprise that they launched in the afternoon and evening of September 11th there in the Middle East. And we've talked about the first side of it, right? We just need to mention that again. The Islamophobia film is important. It is important, if only because these Republicans are running from it as fast as they can. Oh, it's not important. It's irrelevant. Hey, why is that? Why is that? They say, well, it had nothing to do with Libya. Fine, maybe nothing to do with Libya. But wait a minute. There were demonstrations in Egypt, in Pakistan, in 25 other countries that were all about this film. And you don't have to see the film, right? You're told, go out and demonstrate. The West has come up with another Islamophobia film. So the film is a real factor. And the reason that the Romneys, the Kolob Brotherhood, would like to run away from this is because they helped to produce the film. And here's, of course, the way it goes. Don't look at poor little Sam Basile, the loser, the patsy, the ex-convict, the drug informant, whatever he is, put in jail now for violating his parole because he used the Internet. This is a poor little guy who got caught in something much bigger. The person who actually provided the studio and who got the permit for the filming is Joseph Nasrallah, like Basile, a Coptic Christian. Basile is, of course, Akula, and I'm sure he has other names. But the Copt that you have to look at, the Coptic Christian from Egypt you have to look at is Joseph Nasrallah, because he leads us to the matrix of this entire thing, both prongs, which is the Islamophobia network. Now, don't take my word for it. Take a look at this very interesting report that was put out by the Center for American Progress, and I guess that's pretty much mainstream, isn't it? Mainstream, yeah. I think it's some people from the Clinton administration who set this up, and they have money. The Center for American Progress, I think, is designed since Brookings has moved to the center-right. This is supposed to be center-left. And they put out this highly interesting report about the Islamophobia network. And it turns out the report on the Islamophobia network is practically a map to what happened on September 11th, 2012. We'll be back in a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So we're reminding you, go to progressivepress.com, progressivepress.com. If you can't find it, go to it through tarpley.net. You can click on the cover of the book that we're talking about. Click on that on tarpley.net, takes you to Progressive Press. Otherwise, go to progressivepress.com, Progressive Press of California. Get yourself a copy immediately of Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America, polygamy, theocracy, and subversion. And get ready, 2 weeks from tomorrow, from the 14th of October, be in New York for the launch of the United Front Against Austerity downtown near Canal Street, Tribeca, 56 Walker Street, I guess it is. And that's the INN World Report Auditorium, the INN Auditorium, and noon to 6. Now, the thesis is, we've just heard this complete blather about this Benghazi incident, and generally the events starting on September 11th of this year. Remember, 25 large demonstrations across the Arab and Islamic world, including in Europe as well. These were predicated on the Islamophobia film. The Islamophobia film is not the work of this poor little patsy, Sam Basil Nakula, but rather the actual facilities and the permit were those of Joseph Nasrallah. Now, Joseph Nasrallah takes us right to the heart of the matter, which is the Islamophobia Network. And remember, you want to check this stuff out. It's a special report called Fear Incorporated. Fear Incorporated, The Roots of the Islamophobia Network in America, by Wajahat Ali, Eli Clifton, Matthew Duss, Lee Fang, Scott Keyes, and Faiz Shakir. Center for American Progress. And here we get the entire story, at least the main personalities, not the entire story, but the main personalities of the Islamophobia Network, and also who pays them, right? Richard Mellon Scaife Foundation, Russell Berry Foundation. You can see it all in this report, the funders. And what we see here, they have an interesting list. The leading lights of the Islamophobia Network, and they have any number of them, except they've left out really the most important person. It's John Bolton. John Bolton is the top neocon who spoke at the demonstration run by the Islamophobia Network on September 11th, 2010, because it's the Islamophobia Network. It's associated above all with Pamela Geller. She's often on the media. It's associated with Bridget Gabriel. David Horowitz is on there too. So this is the relevant network, and we'll come back to this in just a minute. Joseph Nasrallah attended that demonstration, which you could see them all on display, September 11th, 2010, near Ground Zero, Lower Manhattan, World Trade Center area. That's where they had their demonstration. So Nasrallah comes there, Pamela Geller is chairing the meeting, and the main speaker is John Bolton. That's the Romney campaign. He's going to be Secretary of State under Romney. He is the leading neocon working with and for Romney. So we go really directly from Nasrallah to Bolton. This means to me that there is an implication that the Islamophobia Network is heavily implicated in this Islamophobia movie, which is the atmospheric of the entire thing. In other words, something, an attack occurs on a U.S. embassy. Is it a robbery? Is it just a local bombing? Is it, who knows what it is? Well, in this case, with this film, you can explain to people, well, these are Islamic extremists, and then you can take it from there. So, Bolton is the Romney campaign. He's up there with Elliot Cohen, with Robert Kagan, with Dan Senior that we saw on television last night with Ryan. Of course, he tells Ryan what to say. Every word out of Ryan's mouth on foreign policy comes from Dan Senior. Dan Senior was the spokesman for the indefensible, the U.S. occupation of Iraq, a debacle, a catastrophe, breaking up the Iraqi army, destroying the Iraqi state, all those American soldiers who died because of the rank incompetence, in addition to the raving aggression of Dan Senior. Well, he's up there spinning in the spin room for Ryan last night. Anyway, the Islamophobia film, you can see, is heavily linked to the Romney campaign. But now the news, this we knew before. This we had basically a day or two after the event. Here is now the news that comes out of the hearings. I suppose the first thing we should mention is that General David Petraeus, person we've devoted attention to, we actually expected Petraeus to be on one of the tickets, probably the Republican. We thought he might be a presidential candidate. We thought he might be a vice presidential candidate, and maybe he still is. Or maybe, as some say, he's headed to become president of Princeton now that Shirley Tilghman has departed, or will depart after, 10 years there. Petraeus told the House Intelligence Committee on, I believe, the 14th of September, 3 days after the attack, Petraeus told the House Intelligence Committee that it was a demonstration gone awry. It was a demonstration about the film that went awry. It got out of hand, and the RPGs came out, and the mortars came out, and it just happened that way. So I'm afraid that when Biden gets up there and says, demonstration is what the Intelligence Committee told us, well, Petraeus did tell the House Intelligence Committee that it was a demonstration that had gotten out of hand. Now, this already is something very, very interesting. What's he doing? Is he covering up for the CIA-Mormon mafia? He's covering up for the CIA for sure. Is he pushing Obama, Romney out on the limb so that they'll tell you this fantastic story about the demonstration? Well, we'll keep going with this. We'll continue our analysis. Now, concerning the CIA, in these hearings that we had, the hearings were on Wednesday afternoon. And again, it's the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. So the chairman is the torpedo Issa, and also on this committee is a top member of the Mormon mafia in Congress. Let's think of it as a seamless Mormon mafia that goes from the Congress to the CIA to the FBI to the NSA to the State Department and so forth. And here we have Jason Chaffetz. Chaffetz is a surrogate for Romney, top member of the Mormon mafia. So he's going to lead the charge in the middle of this hearing along with Issa. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Remember, get your copy of Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America, Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion. Get it from progressivepress.com, progressivepress.com. Easy on the budget. If you act now, you can get it for $6 as an ebook. Get it now. It's not going to stay $6 very long because the demand is increasing. And, of course, we want to also remind you, October 27th is the day to be in New York City for the launch of the United Front Against Austerity. If you don't like this choice, the Hobson's choice between Romney and Obama, and who's going to like that, the alternative has got to be organized, and it's got to be hard-hitting, class-based, and programmatic, and that's what we're aiming for at this launch. So we've established that General Petraeus told the House Intelligence Committee, that guy Rogers, Republican partisan, 3 days after the attack, that this was a demonstration that had gone out of control. Petraeus, the head of the CIA, and indeed the personal union of the Pentagon and the CIA. Is Petraeus throwing himself on the side of Romney with this, or is he just trying to defend the CIA, or is he trying to defend the CIA-Mormon mafia? I think that's, or has the CIA-Mormon mafia captured Petraeus for his ambition, right? Because I still think he's interested in national office, right? And it has to, if he becomes president of Princeton, we can then compare him to Eisenhower becoming president of Columbia, and then using that as the springboard for the presidency, because that's what Eisenhower did, from president of Columbia to being president. At any rate, we've gone through the fact that the Islamophobia film is basically a product of the Romney campaign working through the infamous Islamophobia network. And we'll be back to the Islamophobes in just a minute. We're now at the point where the hearings are occurring on Wednesday afternoon at the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, the ISA committee. Jason Chaffetz is there as a attack dog for Romney, his fellow member of the Mormon mafia. So at a certain point, the State Department official, and I guess the leader of the State Department delegation is Undersecretary Kennedy, they show a satellite picture of the U.S. compound from above. And as soon as the State Department guys put this up, they say, all right, here's the consulate, here's an annex. Jason Chaffetz, Republican of Utah, Kolob representative, was the first to unmask, this is now Dana Milbank of Skull and Bones here in the Washington Post, the first to unmask the spooks. Point of order. We're getting into classified issues that deal with sources and methods that would be totally inappropriate in an open forum such as this. The State Department says, don't worry, it's all unclassified. I totally object to the use of that photo, says Jason Chaffetz. And I think he's trying to defend the Mormon mafia. I was told specifically while I was in Libya that I could not and should not ever talk about what you're showing here today. And then ISA essentially then caves in and says, yes, we're gonna hide this picture. So the upshot of all this is what? That there's a CIA base nearby. There's a CIA base which has at least 12 heavily armed, trained CIA operatives, military style, because they are a rapid response force. Some say it's 12, some say it's 7. The CIA is in there big time. It may, according to one of the people in this hearing, we're not going to point out the details of what may still, in fact, be a facility of the United States government or more facilities. It's a CIA base, and we're told that it's the OGA, other government agency. This is a base of OGA. The OGA means the CIA. So here we have it. Now, this had been made known. The existence of the CIA operation there had been made known even by the New York Times several days in advance. And that had been published. It was simply that the CIA was there. Right? This was now a matter of pretty clear public record. But then we learned more. I would call your attention. Gold is where you find it, right? So take a look at the Daily Kos. There's a couple of articles here. Levy MG, Leveymg, writes essentially 2 articles on this. We get from Levy MG, which is a rehash of the New York Times article plus other material. On Friday, September 14th, Levy MG writes, blowback in Benghazi, attack linked to regime change operations in Libya and Syria. This is very much on the line of what I published 2 days before that, I believe, on tarpley.net. Then again, on the September 25th, Libya attack casts unwanted spotlight on CIA and Blackwater role in Syria. And what this comes down to is there is a CIA base there. We know from the New York Times it's 12. According to others, it's 7. By the way, he also had 5 guards and 4 local militia. And then, of course, the State Department had hired, they thought, the February 17th Martyrs Brigade, the people who killed General Yunus and got Hifter into the Supreme Command, Hifter being the CIA candidate. They were also on call, but they didn't show up. But let's stick with what we're learning about Stevens. Now, normally we try to follow the rule de mortuis nihil nisi bonum, right? We're not interested in digging up. We're not interested in muckraking against the deceased. But here we have to, because it's clear that Ambassador Stevens' major task was to be a liaison with the terror corridor. I wrote about the terror corridor, Benghazi, Derna, Tobruk. Wrote about that March 2011. And it was based on those files, the West Point study, based on the files that the U.S. Army had captured along the Syrian-Iraqi border back in the mid-aughties during the hot phase of that war. It's clear now that Ambassador Stevens was a principal interface of the U.S. government with those terrorists, right? Because they come out of the Sanusi Brotherhood, Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, people like Kumu, the man who supposedly killed Stevens, or sent his militia to kill him, is that 5-year Guantanamo Bay operative, graduate, who could only have gotten out of Guantanamo Bay by becoming a U.S. double agent. So we have the basic fact is CIA operative kills U.S. ambassador. But there's more. When Ambassador Stevens came to Libya for the first time, he was accompanied by Blackwater, as we find, and he's accompanied by a guy called Mr. Smith. Now, is that his real name? I don't know. But Stevens, this is now according to Daily Kos and some others, when Stevens came to Benghazi on the Greek freighter in April of 2011, in the early phase of the Libyan civil war, he was accompanied by a top official of Blackwater International. Now, the reason that Stevens had been chosen for this job, Stevens had been vice consul in Benghazi, in Libya, in 2008, and it was presumably Stevens who created the liaison channels to the Al-Qaeda or Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, the terror corridor there, the people between Benghazi, Derna, Tobruk. So that's what he was up to. And it's also very interesting. A byproduct of this is we learn more about how the attack on Gaddafi was organized, that it was actually Blackwater International was organizing the fighters, the jihadis, the international brigade that came in to fight against Gaddafi. They were under the command of Blackwater, put it that way. Not very pretty. We'll be back in a minute with more. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Remember, buy your copy of Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America, Polygamy, Theocracy, Subversion. Get it from ProgressivePress.com, ProgressivePress.com. The ebook available for $6. It's a no-brainer. And act now, because it won't be $6 forever. And remember, October 27th, New York City, the launch of the United Front Against Austerity. We'll devote more to that next week as we get more of the specific content nailed down. So we're working on various angles there. But let's get back now to this Benghazi. Okay, Petraeus says the demonstration in Benghazi, it was a demonstration that got out of hand, says Petraeus. We now know that we know what we suspected the whole time, right? What was Ambassador Stevens doing in Benghazi? Why should he be in Benghazi? Right? Because he's got his embassy is in Tripoli, and that's much quieter, far fewer death squads in Tripoli, because that was Gaddafi country, and it's just calmer. And he's got all of his facilities there, and he's got his semi-fortified embassy. Here's an interesting fact. The last thing that Stevens did was to meet with a Turkish official. A Turkish official. So Stevens accompanies the Turkish official to the gate of the consulate compound and sees him off into the night. That's about 8:30, and then he goes inside. He thinks he's completed his workday, and then the attack comes. Kumu's terrorist gang. And of course, Kumu is somebody that Stevens would have met with. He would have known him. He would have been dealing with him. And the question I ask is, what would Stevens be meeting with a Turkish official about in the Benghazi, Derna, Tobruk area? Well, I'm sorry. This is terror city. This is terrorist heaven. This produces more terrorists, more jihadis, more Wahhabites, more Salafis, and they're their own thing. They're the Senussi Brotherhood. This was a guerrilla force used by the British in Egypt against the Italians and others. This was the basis of the King Idris regime. These Senussis, and they are extremists, right? They are fanatics. They seem to be the most concentrated fanatics you're going to find. I would have to submit that the only reason, right, given these, the likely thing, that Stevens would be talking with a Turkish official in the Benghazi, Derna, Tobruk area, is the airlift. And the airlift is, how do you airlift jihadis, terrorists, Al-Qaeda's, Libyan Islamic Fighting Group from that Cyrenaica area to Turkey? And from Turkey, they're going to go to Syria. We know this. We know that there's already been a NATO airlift of terrorist killers from Cyrenaica into southern Turkey. The stories were that they landed at Iskandarun. Other stories that they landed at Adana, I believe, near the Incirlik. Well, they landed at the Incirlik NATO and U.S. Air Force Base, but they were then operating there. And we remember when this was happening. We'll look at Syria in just a minute, but the Syrian death squads are in big trouble. They're collapsing. The Syrian army is quelling them now. They are in the last throes, apparently. Now, they'll be able to keep up a low to medium level guerrilla war for a long, long time. But in terms of attempting to seize control of Damascus or attempting to even control large parts of Aleppo, it looks like they're finished. So what would the U.S. be doing around September 11th? They'd be trying to get another wave, and indeed we had reports that there had been a request by the U.S. for another wave of terrorist killers to come into Syria to try to keep up the fight against Assad. So, again, why a Turkish official in that area? What is the thing that might make sense that would bring a U.S. ambassador to Benghazi to meet with a Turkish official in the middle of that terror corridor? We know what has gone on. Now, we got to get one other thing in here, right? We can see Jason Chaffetz trying to cover up for what I think is the CIA-Mormon mafia. Now, the connection to the Romney campaign, however, is even more even closer. We have now we're looking back to the Daily Kos, right? To this article here by Levy MG, Leveymg. Libya attack casts unwanted spotlight on CIA and Blackwater role in Syria. Okay, so an attack in Libya that casts light on Syria. Exactly, because this is the way it works. Because it's the Daily Kos. They can't quite tell you that the Arab Spring was based on Al-Qaeda death squads deployed by the CIA, but that is what it is, with the help of the State Department, to be sure. We have in March a series of emails leaked by Stratfor, the so-called security and intelligence firm, and they remind us that Mr. Smith, former director of Blackwater, was seen last year contacting Syrian rebels he was sent to contact Syrian rebels in Turkey. That's based on BusinessInsider.com. And this Daily Kos comments that a lot of these people have disappeared, right? They want to disappear. Some emails from this Mr. Smith of Blackwater were sent on December 13th, right before the Stratfor email servers were hacked. Now, this is not Assange. This is coming from somebody else, as far as I can tell. And in this interesting exchange, we're told that this is Mr. Burton, the head of counterterrorism at Stratfor, summarizes the activities of Mr. Smith of Blackwater and some of his associates in Syria late last year. The source and Dr. Walid Fares, note this name, W-A-L-I-D-P-H-A-R-E-S. Source and Dr. Walid Fares are getting air cover from Congresswoman Myrick. This is Congresswoman Sue Myrick Myrick, and she is the North Carolina 9 congresswoman. She is apparently retiring from the House. She announced that in February. But the source, back in December of last year, almost a year ago now, source and Dr. Walid Fares are getting air cover, political cover, from Congresswoman Myrick to engage Syrian opposition in Turkey, non-MB and non-Qatari, on a fact-finding mission for Congress. The true mission is how they can help in regime change. Source intends to offer his services to help protect the opposition members as he had underway in Libya. So it's connected, right? Mr. Smith comes in with Ambassador Stevens, operates in Libya for a time, and then goes on to Syria. This is what we've been saying all along, isn't it? I think so. It's all confirmed. Jamie F. Smith was also chief executive of the security firm SGC International. He's a former director of Blackwater. SCG emails reveal in 2011 its operatives were involved in training the Libyan resistance and were allegedly on the scene in August to confirm the killing of Gaddafi. Now, Walid Fares, who is this? It's the Romney campaign. Here we have it on this side too. So he's in the middle of this stuff. Walid Fares is sort of the poor man's Fuad Ajami, or the poor man's Fareed Zakaria. He has, I guess, some kind of academic credentials, but he's a think tanker with a certain amount of academic, or the academic degree cover. And we'll be back in just a minute to wrap this part of the story up. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley, Washington, D.C. Get your copy of Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America, Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion. Get it at progressivepress.com. Progressivepress.com. Paper copy will ship almost immediately. And ebook available, $6. Get it now. Won't be that price for too much longer. Quite sincere about this. This is the way it works economically. So get it now. And October 27th, New York City, at the INN Auditorium, INN World Report Auditorium, at 56 Walker Street, Tribeca, near Canal Street, south of Canal Street. We're going to have the launch of the United Front Against Austerity from noon to 6. Be there. You can look at the go through my website. Look at the top of tarpley.net. You'll see the logo of the UFA, UFAA. Click on that. Takes you there. Get all the information. I can't send the information individually to people. People who have sent me emails, go to tarpley.net. Look at the top. Click on that, and then you get the entire story direct. So, Walid Fares, right here. Just to refresh your memory about this. Now we've had an interruption here. Walid Fares. We're told now this gaggle of people who are associated with Stevens in setting up essentially the Transitional National Council and their army, right? Originally under Yunus, except he had to be assassinated to make sure that the CIA candidate Hifter got in. Here we find that one of these people, Mr. Smith of Blackwater and other firms, like Blackwater, I guess XE later on, Source and Dr. Walid Fares are getting air cover from Congresswoman Myrick to engage Syrian opposition in Turkey on fact-finding mission for Congress. True mission is how they can help in regime change in Syria and protect opposition members as he did in Libya. Now, Walid Fares, again, he's the cheap imitation Fuad Ajami, the cheap imitation Fareed Zakaria, and we have all kinds of profiles of him. He pretends to be an academic, but it's really a think tanker. He was, however, professor at the National Defense University. In military, the bullet heads like his stuff, huh? So he goes to the National Defense University. This is amazing. He has been part of the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, the World Maronite Union, former professor at Florida Atlantic University from 93 to 2004. Boy, this is an interesting story. And what do we find? He's from Lebanon, and he seems to be connected to death squads in Lebanon. Well, let's see what we find. Mother Jones, October 27, 2011. Top Romney advisor tied to militia that massacred. Walid Fares, the recently announced co-chair of the Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney's Middle East Advisory Group, okay? The co-chair, he was, I'm not sure he still is. Walid Fares was the co-chair of Romney's Middle East Advisory Group. He was the spokesperson of the Lebanese forces in Lebanon in 1986. It's an umbrella group of Christian militias, and I think it includes the Phalange. This is not pretty, people. This is not pretty at all. And one of the people involved here is Samir Jaja. And this is one of the most horrendous figures on the scene in Lebanon. Samir Jaja, Geagea. And this is essentially extreme right-wing person, and not so good. But this is what you're going to get with Romney. And this is bad news. So what you see, Walid Fares comes out of the situation in the Lebanese civil war. Very interesting from my point of view that Walid Fares is the anti-General Aoun, right? The touchstone of the correct line for Lebanese politics. It's complicated. It's hard to follow from the outside. The basic rule of thumb for Lebanon is find out what General Michel Aoun is doing and go with that. You won't be wrong very often if you go with Michel Aoun. And this character, naturally, this Fares, is apparently implicated in getting Michel Aoun out. In October 2011, Republican candidate Mitt Romney included Walid Fares on a list of foreign policy advisors filled with neoconservatives and other like-minded foreign policy hardliners, including Elliot Cohen, Robert Kagan, Michael Chertoff, the guy who brought you the scanners, right? He brought you the that particular fraud, right? The Knicker bomber. Of course, we know how that came in, right? That the one agency said, no, give him his visa. Don't take his visa away. Michael Chertoff, Eric Edelman, John Lehman, Dan Senior, star of the debate spin room last night, Vin Weber, Paula Dobriansky. So you get the idea. Now, I know this is a lot of detail, but you're not going to get it anywhere else. That we have on the prong of the film, which is important because the film is the basis of 25 countries with demonstrations going to package the entire thing for world opinion. What the hell is going on? And then on the other side, the situation with Petraeus saying it's a demonstration, telling Biden what Biden then repeated. And, of course, parenthesis here, let's get Susan Rice fired after all this, right? Can't we please, Republicans, can you please demand that Susan Rice be fired? Can't you impeach her? You could also impeach Hillary. Hillary should be fired. If the embassy doesn't have sufficient security, the Secretary of State is responsible. And if there are lies being circulated, Susan Rice is responsible. Let's get them accountable for what they did, right? Rather than the White House. The White House was told by Petraeus what was going on. You can get Obama and Biden on many other things. You don't need to stretch it this way, because then you'll be letting off these others that we're saying. So what goes on? Petraeus says it's a demonstration gone awry. There is a CIA post there. There's a 7 to 12 man person CIA Rapid Response Force, and Stevens was meeting with the Turkish official. The killer is Gumu, Kumu, Qumu. This is the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, 5 years training in Guantanamo. So to me, this is a pretty interesting package. Now, the people are walking in darkness. People don't understand what's going on. This is tragic, but there it is. That's the essence. Now, if anybody ever wanted to fight back on any of this from any quarter, they could do it. Now, let's shift gears now. We've spent, I'm afraid, a lot of time on this Benghazi situation, but after hearing this now from 99 million reactionaries, it is the Romney campaign. In other words, if you didn't like what happened on September 11th, that's the Romney campaign. That's their Islamophobia network that they control through John Bolton, and that's your man, your people in the CIA-Mormon mafia. Now, the broader context, of course, now is that these operations have brought us to, looks like, the brink of a regional war in the Middle East, right? The Syrian airlines plane forced down in Turkey, it leads us to question the sanity of Erdogan, right? Whom the gods would destroy, they first drive mad. Maybe that applies to Erdogan. We'll get back to that in a minute. In the meantime, it's Recep resign before you start a Middle East war. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Remember to get your copy of Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America. Get it from progressivepress.com, progressivepress.com. Ebook available. Get it now. Price not going to stay as low as it is for too long. And paper copies available for shipping almost immediately. That's obviously the long-term investment here in the world of electromagnetic pulse and everything else. But actually get both. And you have one for the library and one for the Kindle, if that's what it is. So let's look now at Syria. Most indications now are that the Free Syrian Army has been defeated. They've been smashed to some extent. We just had interesting reports this week that the Free Syrian Army has split into 3 parts, and we knew that there were 300 death squads operating under this vague umbrella of Colonel Assad, not a relative. Colonel Assad of the Free Syrian Army had 300 death squads that were out there, not really ever working for him. But now it's 3 separate groups, and apparently none of them, or maybe one of them at most, has anything to do with Colonel Assad. And the leader of one of these groups is a religious fanatic, a sheikh of the Sunni persuasion. So that looks very, very grim for the Free Syrian Army. And I think that explains what Erdogan is doing. Erdogan now sees his policy collapsing in front of his eyes. The word we had militarily from Syria was that the Syrian National Army, the real Syrian army, the patriotic one, was in the process of taking over the last neighborhoods of Aleppo held by the death squads. The death squads are now being driven out of Aleppo, and they're being mopped up in the countryside between Aleppo and the Turkish border. We also had this interesting incident last week or so when the Russian government was able to create this channel between the U.S. and the Syrian military and government so that the U.S. could be satisfied that the chemical weapons were totally under control, were not going to be used, and were not going to be taken over by terrorists. And this was the favorite pretext that was being advanced for possible attack on Syria. And at that time, the Syrian army sent out text messages to the death squad saying, your game is over, game over, you are finished. So we had the Syrian death squads, international ones, moved their headquarters. Colonel Assad moved his headquarters out of Turkey into Syria because he was so widely rejected and criticized and reviled. And so now we saw him on Al Jazeera with Anita McNaught, I guess, talking about how he was now on Syrian territory, but it's too little too late. There is no opposition. Politically speaking, it's a zoo, chaos, all that money, all those hotel bills, all those free meals for nothing, and the Free Syrian Army. They still have jihadis, they still have crazies coming in, but it doesn't get them anywhere militarily. At the same time, though, that's when Erdogan freaks out. And this is terrible for Turkey, right? Turkey deserves better. Turkey is a modernizing, progressive country, many positive features, but they should not dabble in this stuff. Now, Erdogan was sold a bill of goods, right? He's gullible. His ambition, his vanity got the better of him. Obama on the telephone every day. We'll make you our regional satrap. We had to get rid of Egypt, so now there's a new opportunity for you. It won't be Saudi Arabia. They're too weak. They're having internal troubles. It's going to be you in Turkey. And he bought this. And the neo-Ottoman ideology of Davutoglu played into it. All tragic. And then it turned out that he'd gone out on a limb that Syria was not going to collapse. And those promises were vastly overblown. I repeat my formal warning to everybody as the author of 2 books on Obama. Don't trust Obama. Don't believe a word he says. His method is deception and dissembling and fakery. That's how he's different from Bush to some degree. Now we've had a Syrian commercial airliner forced down by F-16s inside Turkey. This is now an international incident. This is an escalation which Turkey is very ill-advised to make. And I remember in the 19th century there was a Russo-Turkish war every 20, 30 years. World War I was probably the last big example of this. And this was bad for everybody, certainly very bad for Turkey, right? Turkey now, number 16 economically in the world. They'll be lucky if they're 100 if they start a war with Syria. So it's an absolute disaster. And for what? To overthrow Assad, which is a reasonable, orderly, existing government, in the name of death squads and crazies and these political hacks, opportunists, and adventurers of the Syrian National Council. They can't even agree on a figurehead so that they could have gotten much more loot, but they couldn't do it. There are a bunch of mental cases in that sense. So Erdogan is way out on a limb. Now, the question is, will Erdogan have the sense to climb back from the limb and lose a little face, or is he going to go all the way? Right? The situations, right? Netanyahu is in a similar situation to some degree with Iran, but you commit your entire career now for a year and a half, 2 years to this Syrian adventure, and then it collapses in front of you. What do you do? Well, first firing across the border, now forcing this plane down. Very stern moment when the Russian Foreign Ministry convokes the Turkish ambassador and says, we demand explanations. What have you done with our plane? Why did you rough up the crew? Why did you steal the contents, the cargo of the plane? Radar equipment, says Lavrov. Fine. Radar equipment is legal. It's dual use. Could be used at the airport, could be used militarily. This is none of your business. These are all transactions that Russia has with Syria. So Turkey is now in a grave situation. Now, Panetta says the U.S. troops are being increased in Jordan. It's not that the U.S. is sending troops to Jordan. It's that the garrison that the U.S. has there in bases, right, more or less secret, not very secret, will be increased. Now, here's the other angle, though. The 150 or so that are going to Jordan, are they there to look into Syria, or are they there to stop a revolution in Jordan? Because once it becomes clear that the NATO death squads have been defeated, that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Bahrain have been defeated inside Syria, this may blow the lid off the internal situation of those countries. Those revolutions may go into high gear. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Remember, get your copy of Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America. We've seen an episode of it happened in Benghazi, thanks to the CIA-Mormon mafia. There was a CIA rapid response team of at least 7 and possibly 12 components, a rapid response force that apparently failed to intervene to save the life of Ambassador Stevens. And now we got a double betrayal. One is that the CIA asset Kumu comes to kill him, and that the CIA rapid response team on the ground doesn't respond. CIA Mormon Mafia prime suspect. Who else? Cui bono, cui prodest. That's the method. And there it is. You have to know that there's a CIA Mormon Mafia. Read Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America, and you'll know the general outlines. It started when Brigham Young sent one of his sons. He had lots, of course, polygamist, right? 60, 70 wives. One of Brigham Young's sons was given an appointment, the Utah appointment, to West Point, the U.S. Military Academy. And they hazed him by making him drink, of all things, coffee. Okay. So, that's the Benghazi story. But now, concerning the Middle East, let's recommend one article here, Towards a Western Retreat from Syria, by Thierry Maison. This is VoltaireNet, and he reviews what we've talked about on the show. July 18th was the big offensive, right, the decapitation attempt, together with the television warfare. We exhaustively reviewed it. On September 26th, some death squad people, Al-Qaeda members, were able to penetrate the defense ministry in Damascus, and they had suicide vests on, so they killed themselves there. There was an attempt to attack the TV station and also the government headquarters and the airport, all coordinated by NATO, and some of them did blow up, but some of them did not work, and the overthrow of the Syrian government has not occurred. So right now we've got the diplomatic offensive initiative passing to Lavrov, and the idea is to convince the NATO people that it's finished, and that what they have to do is pick peaceful coexistence with NATO. Now, speaking from my point of view here, very hard to do because of the mad dog imperialists that rule the town. Obviously, with neocons, you're dealing with absolute mad dogs, and when you've got the Brzezinskyites that are running the show now, these are, 7 or 8 on a scale of insanity, and they all would argue that you dare not lose face. Another interesting thing is the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Russian Federation, Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. They're preparing peacekeepers. Now, this would be constructive. Send in peacekeeping forces from the Collective Security Treaty Organization and let them impose or facilitate a ceasefire. Then you'd see who is disturbing the peace. Now, all of this within the framework of my sort of neo-Zimmerwald, right, the neo-Zimmerwald approach, which is turn the imperialist war into a political revolution, peaceful, of course, if you can. And that applies now. If the centerpiece of Saudi, Qatar, and Bahrain diplomacy and politics, which is the overthrow of Assad, if that fails, there's nothing like a foreign defeat to stimulate internal unrest, also where the economies are bad, right? And we know that 40% of the people in Saudi Arabia are economically in bad shape. And we're getting more reports of demonstrations in these reactionary Gulf monarchies. So this is where we will direct our attention. Now, of course, the Biden-Ryan debate is far away from this, but you get the idea, and I want to come back to Dan Senior again. This character was infamous in the world as the spokesman for the unspeakable, for the Jerry Bremer occupation of Iraq, right? From General MacArthur in Japan, very successful from many points of view, also with the help of Wolfgang Ladajinski, the land reform expert, was driven out of the U.S. government by Ezra Taft Benson, the reactionary Mormon prophet. Another story. But from General MacArthur's occupation of Japan to the Jerry Bremer, Dan Senior occupation of Iraq, from success to disaster. And, of course, the question is, what values are you bringing? Are you bringing New Deal values of progress and rising standard of living and human dignity, or are you bringing derivatives and financial speculation and the casino economy and so forth? This is the problem of what are you bringing? What values are informing this whole operation? So Dan Senior was there in the spin room. Everything Romney says is regurgitation of something that Bolton or Kagan or Elliot Cohen or others have told him. Everything Ryan says is direct from Dan Senior, and you saw him in the spin room last night. So Romney is surrounded by angry neocons. They want to vindicate the sullied honor of their insane faction. They left Washington under a cloud in 2008, 2009, and now they want to make a comeback. And since they are neocons, the only way they can imagine this is by having a successful foreign war to try to erase the memory of the disastrous foreign wars that we've just gone through. So the other important angle internationally is the financial situation. You can see I did a commentary for Press TV on the International Monetary Fund downgrading their prognosis for the world economy. Well, of course, we are in a depression. It is a world financial and economic depression of unimaginable proportions. It is worse than the 1930s. It's going a little bit slower, but it's not intrinsically slower. It just means that the world is bigger and more developed. In 1929 to 1933, you could go from the initial panic in 1929 to the bottom of the depression in 1933, because you had U.S. stock crisis, 1929, Central European banking crisis, 1931, in particular the summer of 1931, U.S. banking panic in 1932 to 33, and then by 1933 you've reached the bottom. And the New Deal comes in, and the U.S. begins a slow process of recovery. And, of course, by then it's too late for Germany because Hitler is already in power. That's 4 years, more or less. Now, this time we are now at the 4-year point, right? It's 4 years as of September 15th of this year, right? We're a little bit beyond 4 years. And what we're seeing is that after hitting the U.S. and then hitting Europe and continuing to hit Europe, the depression goes on to China and to India. So we've got significant slowdowns beginning in China, India, and I believe also in Brazil and other places. So the depression has to work through a larger globe economically, but depression it is, and universal it is, and make no mistake about it. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Remember, get your copy of Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America from ProgressivePress.com, ProgressivePress.com in Palm Desert, California. And you can get it either paper copy shipping almost immediately and ebook available right now. Get your ebook now because prices are destined to rise because of lively demand, among other things. And October 27th, New York City, at the INN World Report Auditorium, 56 Walker Street, Tribeca, near Canal Street, noon to 6, the launch of the United Front Against Austerity, disgusted by Obama, disgusted by Romney. You have every reason to be. Hobson's choice. Act now to organize an alternative. Anti-austerity. Fight genocide against the American people and everybody else, but starts at home, like charity. So that will be an important event. Now, concerning the IMF, right? Every forecast they make has a political motive. Madame Lagarde, or as we call here, Madame Lagarde. Madame Lagarde. The IMF puts out these prognoses. They do it for political reasons. What are they trying to do? In the case of the U.S., they're trying to promote more genocidal austerity. They're going to try to hype this fiscal cliff. There's no fiscal cliff. This is a Republican invention. This is hype from the oligarchy. And we don't need a grand bargain. We don't want it. This is what Obama wants. Obama is attacking Romney and Ryan, and he's getting ready to give them a great deal of what they want. He's already surrendered in terms of defining the problem. So Obama, as we know, eager to sell you out. And Lunch Bucket Joe in the debate, oh, he's a friend of the working class, except when he's not. And when he's not is in the grand bargain, in the shadow of the fictitious fiscal cliff with the lame duck session. So all of these characters who are on their way out of government are going to be looking to Wall Street. They can sell you out more easily in November, December than they can at any other time. Now, Lagarde, of course, Lagarde covers herself because she says, oh, we don't need just austerity, we need growth. Well, look what you've done to Greece, Lagarde. Greek jobless, 25%, Spanish jobless, 25%. It's a depression. It's burning. We're even told now that the Red Cross has 300,000 cases of people in Europe, right? We're back to, post-World War II in Europe, and this is, of course, tragic. However, how did we get here? Look, what I saw interesting examples of right-wing insanity, which is that smashing the euro is a defeat for the globalists. It's not. Wrong. The policy of the globalists is what? Secession, microstates, mini-states, subdivision, balkanization. You get it, right? It's partition studies. It's to bust up the existing, whatever the existing political, military, or economic units are. It doesn't matter what they call themselves. To smash those into pieces so they cannot resist. The crazy quilt will be back. The Holy Roman Empire map, the crazy quilt, will be back. The patchwork, no good. So how did we get here in Europe? Well, it started, you'll remember, with Countrywide Bank and then Northern Rock. And that was in 2007. That's 6 years ago now. The bankruptcy of Northern Rock, the large one. Countrywide was, of course, a fairly substantial entity, but not a big money center bank. Northern Rock got pretty close to that area. Then we had the banking panic based on derivatives, right? Based on the fact that subprime mortgages, along with auto loans and other kinds of loans, had been securitized, made into derivatives, and that credit default swaps had been sold on those, and they'd been included in collateralized debt obligations. So that meant that when these intrinsically manageable categories of debt went bankrupt, that was multiplied astronomically by the presence of derivatives. What did the governments of Europe do? What did Ireland do? Ireland guaranteed all the banks. Every country in Europe went out and bailed out its banks. In doing so, the sovereign states ruined their own credit positions, and they gave the opportunity for the ratings agencies, right, these corsairs, these intelligence fronts, S&P and Fitch and Moody's, to come in and downgrade them. So the national states weakened themselves financially by bailing out the zombie banks, by protecting the zombie banks. I remember in the summer of 2009, Germany created a bad bank with 350 billion euros, as I recall, as a line of credit at least. So this was then done. Now, the United States, in order to recover to deal with the Depression, began printing money, a lot of it, right? Helicopter Ben began priming the pump. We had $23 trillion credit line from the Fed. We had $1 trillion or more coming from the U.S. Treasury. And this naturally tended to drive the dollar down during late 2009, 2010. The answer to that was the idea dinner at Monness, Crespi, and Hart, that it would be possible to shift the locus of the crisis into Europe by attacking not the euro frontally, but the bonds of these countries, since they had weakened themselves, bailing out the zombie banks. You could attack the Greek bonds, the Irish bonds, the Portuguese bonds, the pigs, as we heard at that time. Ireland, Italy, Greece, Spain, attack the pigs. And that was a strategy, and that was done with credit default swaps working through the London markets. And that is where the euro crisis comes from. Now, anybody with a brain and some guts would have said, hey, banks, zombie banks, too bad for you. You guessed wrong. You bought the wrong kind of paper. That's what Argentina, Brazil, Mexico have done, doing quite well. So now we have various vultures flying around, right? Let's take Nigel Farage, the UK Independence Party. He's been here in Washington this week. He seems to get all over Russia Today. I'm just amazed by some things that go on in the media. This is a reactionary of the most extreme type. He wanted martial law. Remember that? A riot in London. He wanted national martial law in Great Britain, right? Make it more of a police state than it is. He wants austerity more than what Cameron is giving. Cameron is already extreme deflationary austerity. Farage attacks Cameron from the right, saying your austerity is not extreme enough. So we got a whole bunch of people saying the euro is now going to break up. Nigel Farage, Jimmy Rogers is undoubtedly short the euro, and so forth. This simply will not work. I would compare it to the following. You know, we had the problem of slavery here in the United States. This may be not a well-known comparison, but the abolitionists in the United States, the people like William Lloyd Garrison, said, oh, the American Union is tainted by slavery, therefore we destroy the Union. Let's leave the Union, let's kick the Confederates out, or we'll leave it. These are New England secessionists in a different garb. They're covering themselves with opposition to slavery, but they are New England secessionists. So the answer was not to destroy the Union. It was to save the Union and to defeat slavery inside the Union. This is the same problem with the European Union. The problem is not to destroy the European Union, but to defeat monetarism, the banking power, the finance oligarchy inside Europe. Now, of course, in order to do that, you've got to organize on a European-wide basis. Now, I knew that 40 years ago when I organized in Germany and Italy and created political parties, co-founder in Germany and founder in Italy. You've got to fight back on a European-wide basis. So don't say, oh, because the European Union is vitiated by finance oligarchs and zombie bankers and controlled by it, that is no reason to flee the field, the reason to fight. You could have said Washington was controlled by the slave power conspiracy, and it was for 10 years in the 1850s. But Lincoln and others realized you don't do it that way. You stay in the larger political union and fight the monetarist enemy there. And we'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio. Remember, just too weird. Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover America from ProgressivePress.com. See you in New York, October 27th.